After almost 5 years of Face the Truth, we are taking a new step. Are you ready to face the truth? Face the Truth Live is the monthly podcast from the Truth Church of Olathe, Kansas, with our pastor and Bible teacher, Bishop Gregory Riggin. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Face the Truth. In our last episode, we closed out appealing to our audience to help us pray about the future of this podcast. We met a few weeks ago and decided on the direction that we want to share today. This direction is one that we feel for the foreseeable future. The Face the Truth podcast has evolved and spanned nearly 5 years. As we approach this major milestone, we are stepping in a new direction with our audience. The constant focus from Bishop Riggin has been to deliver biblical teaching through the lens of truth and not tradition. Brother Hilton and I sit here today as a product of Bishop Riggin. He and I are just a couple of many that can testify of that today. In fact, there is a broad listening audience that has approached us at various times and stating how much they enjoy the Face the Truth podcast. We thank each of you for your continued support. Bishop, would you like to take us through the direction for the Face the Truth podcast?
Yes, sir, and I will say thank you, Brother Goff, again for lending the golden voice of Pentecost to our efforts here. And it's good to be back on Face the Truth. It's been a couple of months that we've been absent, and it has been a time of reflection, introspection, determination. As we've looked at what Face the Truth has done since its inception, it's hard right now to comprehend that it's been 5 years. I checked back, and the very first Face the Truth podcast was done in March of 2020. And so, it began then, just as a background to our listeners, it actually was never intended originally to be something that we were putting out there for everybody. It was, it happened during COVID, when we were not able to get together as frequently as we had been. We were blessed in Kansas. We didn't have to shut down completely. I felt, for the sake of our elders, that it was wise for us to not just open the church service. And so we did go to a very limited attendance and everyone going online. But it was such a crazy time, COVID, and folks not really understanding what was going on. And so I felt like, as a pastor, the best thing I could do was to do this daily podcast. And it might be 10 minutes, it might be 15 minutes, sometimes go a little longer, but every day I was just saying something to the members of the Truth Church. And you might remember that I'm talking to Brother Hilton and Brother Goff. Obviously, many of our listeners won't remember this, but in those early days, a lot of times I would have announcements to make about COVID and the status of things and what was going on. But I just felt like times were so uncertain then that they needed to hear the voice of their pastor on a daily basis. But I spent hours. It really consumed most of my time, because when it comes to recordings, I spent a few years in radio some time back. And when it comes to recording and putting out recordings, I have this what is it? The obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. It's got to be perfect. And so I would spend hours cutting out every and stutter, mispronunciation, go back, edit that back in so that And again, this was only aimed at our congregation, but I couldn't get beyond in my own mind the idea of putting out a flawed product. Again, in my mind, it's flawed. So it was just consuming my time. And then once we got past the bulk of COVID and everybody's coming back to church as a full congregation, I knew that I couldn't keep up the pace that I was doing then. And so we cut it back then, and I was doing all of it. I was doing all the recording, I was doing all the production, the editing, I was doing it all. And we went to from a daily podcast to a weekly podcast, and I wanted to focus on doctrine. It seems like we'd gotten some word that maybe people outside of our local congregation, because it was posted to the website and other things, and I thought, it may be a great way to do some outreach locally, and so I began just to focus on doctrine, and those early podcasts, and they're still there. You can go and look back at the early podcast if you subscribe, like on Apple Podcasts or Google or whatever, Spotify. You should be able to go back into those very early podcasts from 5 years ago and see that most of those was basically me just teaching doctrine. Once we got past the COVID era, and then I was just teaching doctrine. And I decided, we weren't really accomplishing the goal of reaching our community, but I was having some pastors reach out to me that had found it, and they were listening, and they were encouraging their saints to listen. And we started realizing, look, we've got a potential here for doing something more than what we really envisioned. And so I brought Brother Hilton, Brother Goff in, and we started meeting together, and we would record sessions where they would offer questions and comments and allow me. So it wasn't just a 30-minute to an hour lecture, but it was more of a conversation. And we got great responses from people who enjoyed that. And in those early days, we brought people in as guests. I think some of our most popular podcasts where we had some brand new converts that we brought in and just let them just ask the questions that new converts would ask, and then just let me respond. And none of that was planned. None of it was written up ahead of time. I never knew when we met what they were going to ask. And that's a fact. I think we even had people ask us about it, if this was all pre-planned. And it wasn't. We literally brought these guys in, sat down in my dining room around my kitchen table, set up our recording equipment, and just let them fire away. Whatever they wanted to know, I just did my best to answer their questions, and received a great response. And then we went through a period of time where I remember we had a section we called Passing the Torch. And we kind of focused on people that I've had a direct impact and influence. You mentioned that you and Brother Hilton were just a couple of many. And those early Passing the Torch series, now all of it again was called Face the Truth, but I'm just talking about a series within Face the Truth. We were bringing men in because God has blessed me. And I've had a lot of men through the years that I've been able to work with and maybe mentor to some degree. And we brought those people in via phone call and let them talk about, the things that I taught them. And so we've had a lot of things that we've covered. Many times, though, in those conversations with just the three of us, we would address topics, and this was intentional. We would address topics that I'm not really normally going to talk about behind the pulpit, not really going to just get up and preach a message on it or teach a lesson on it. But it was something I felt like the people of God needed to hear and needed to know. And I know some of those episodes especially, there were pastors that would contact me or see me at a meeting and say, you don't know how much that episode really helped me. For instance, we did one episode where I don't think it was the the overarching topic per se, but somehow in the process of the discussion, we talked about fellowship and how do you draw the lines of fellowship. And I had a pastor reach out to me. He said he had just moved to a new city, and he and his wife had just, I think that day or the day before, been discussing, there are some men here that seem to be good men. They don't believe exactly what we believe. What are the lines of fellowship? He said, then I heard your podcast. He said, you don't know how much that helped me in making some determinations as to what I do and who I willingly interact with and how I do that. And so I'm thankful that Face the Truth has been able to accomplish those things in these last almost 5 years, as of just a couple of weeks from right now when we're recording this. We will be looking at 5 years exactly since the very first Face the Truth podcast went out. So I'm thankful for what we've been able to accomplish. And there have been times it's been difficult with our schedules. I'm busy. I have got so much going on, and with the work in Africa, the church here, and then, and I'm not saying this in any way to try to make it look like I'm this highly sought after speaker, but I've got things scheduled. I had a man call me the other day, and he said, what's the first weekend you've got available? Well, I try not to miss more than one weekend a month at the church that I pastor. And so with that in mind, I told him, I looked at my calendar. I said, it's going to be sometime in August. And then I just had another pastor call me the other day, and he said, when? And I said, I just talked to this man and I just looked at my calendar. So it may be September before I can do anything. So again, I'm not saying that in any way to try to boast, but I'm just saying, I'm trying to let everybody know my schedule is packed. It is so full. And so it's hard for us to get together and do what we're doing today. We tried doing it after church on Sunday nights. That became a problem. Our folks wanted to stay around. They wanted to be a part, but it got so late for them to stay. And so some of them, they were expressing that we enjoy being there. We enjoy doing it. But by the time we wrap up and finish and then get home on a Sunday night, it's so late to have to, get up early the next morning, get to work. So we weighed all of that out, even to the point of, honestly, I was considering just stopping. Let's just forget about Face the Truth. It's run its course. And Brother Goff, Brother Hilton, the two of you expressed to me that you really didn't want to see that happen. And I really didn't want to either. Face the Truth has kind of become my baby. It's like I enjoy this so much. I enjoy doing it so much. So I really didn't want to. I just didn't know schedule-wise how we could work it out. But we talked about it. We prayed about it. And we did come to some decisions. And one thing is we decided that Face the Truth has not yet run its course. We feel like there is a future for this podcast. We feel like there is a benefit to what we're doing and that we're providing something that's helping, obviously, some people. And I mentioned pastors that are contacting me. And then I've got some of those pastors. For instance, some of them that are home missionaries that have, they have very limited resources. They can't really bring a lot of people in to preach to their congregations. And they don't want to just have their people listening to anybody and everybody. So they've expressed to me that they appreciate having a resource where they know I'm not going to try to steal their saints. I'm not interested in trying to do anything unethical. And yet their people can listen and learn. And they know that I'm even, during a podcast, I'm very conscientious about the fact that if I'm saying something controversial, I often say, talk to your pastor about this. If you're listening and you're not a member of the Truth Church, you go talk to your pastor about this.
Right.
And you get his perspective. And so these men appreciate that. And so they welcome their saints to listen to the podcast and to hear what we have to say. And so I appreciate that, and I don't take it for granted. And so we do feel like that there is a future for Face the Truth. And so then we discussed, well, what is that future? Where do we go from here? And one of the things that I expressed when we met, when we got together to discuss the future of the podcast, was my reason behind the continuation. And I know that I just said, I was considering getting rid of it, but the only reason I thought about it was because I just didn't know if we were really going to be able to keep the schedule going. I didn't want to do it. And the reason I don't really want to end it, there is something in me that drives me right now. And that's kind of where we landed as we started talking about, here's why I feel like we need to continue Face the Truth. It's for this reason. I just last month, we're recording this. Well, no, I guess this is the 1st of March, isn't it? Yesterday was February. Today's the 1st of March. So we're recording this on the 1st of March. But in January, I celebrated my 65th birthday. And was reminded just how old that is when I was notified that I was now going to Medicare for my insurance. And so recognizing I'm 65. And my wife says I'm morbid when I talk this way, but I'm not trying to be morbid. The fact is, it's very much a part of what's in the forefront of my mind is that at 65, how many more productive years do I really have? Now, none of us know. And I was talking to my dear friend, Pastor John Burgess, in Colorado Springs just a few days ago. And he mentioned to me that Bishop Johnson had come to him at the age of 60 and had brought him in and turned his church over to him and told him at the age of 60, he said, I want 10 years of a different kind of ministry. I want to have 10 good years of being able to go out and preach to others. And so that was 20 years ago.
Yes.
So I don't know. I'm 65. I don't know. Maybe I'll have 20 more years. I doubt it. I seriously doubt it. I think productive years, in my mind, I'm thinking 10 or less, honestly. That's the way I'm seeing things. I know the genetics, my family. Now, my mother just passed away last year. She would have turned 91 if she'd lived to her next birthday. And I've often said she was tough. She was one of the toughest ladies I ever met. She survived 2 kinds of cancer. I don't even know. Well, I mean, I could go through a whole list of things that my mom went through. Strokes, any number of things, and was still very lucid, very much to herself and aware of things when her body just finally got tired and gave up. And I often told people, I said, I'm going to tell you about my mom. I said, my mom could get run over by a bus, put a Band-Aid on, and get up and keep going. That's just the way she was. But my dad was not that way. And unfortunately, I didn't get my mom's genetic health. I got my dad's. My dad, as opposed to my mom, had to take early retirement in his 30s because of health problems. Wow. And though he lived into his early 80s, I think he was 82 when he passed, it was 50 years of just constant health problems. Nothing obviously that was life-threatening, but enough that it really slowed him down. And the last several years of his life, though he was alive and though his mind was still sharp, his body was just, he was basically inactive and was in a wheelchair, and he got him a little motorized wheelchair, and he'd get in that when he got out of bed. He'd wheel himself to the kitchen table and eat breakfast and wheel himself over to a recliner and get in the recliner and sit there for the day and then get in the wheelchair and ride back to the bed. And that was the extent of his life. And as I said, unfortunately, I have kind of inherited my dad's genes when it comes to my physical constitution. And so I really don't see that I've got more than 5 to 10 really productive years. I hope that I'm wrong. I'll be very happy if I'm wrong. But just in case, that thought is in the forefront of my mind. And here's the thing. I have sat at the feet of some of the most phenomenal apostolic preachers that I've ever known. Names that are highly regarded especially in our circles. And these men mightily used of God. And when I say sit at their feet, I don't just mean I've listened to them preach. But I mean I've had deep personal connections with these men. Some of them serving under them. Some of them served as my pastor. And so I've had so much poured into me. I've been preaching now, as of February of this year. I preached my first message in 1973. And so 52 years ago, last month, wow, I preached my first message. So I've been preaching for over half a century now. And in those 50 plus years, I've had so much put into me from these phenomenal men of God. And now I'm looking at my timeline ahead of me. And I know I don't have nearly as many years left as I have all the years of things that have been put into my heart and into my spirit. And folks, I've got to get this out of me. I've got to get it off my chest. I've got to pass on things that have been put in me from these phenomenal men of God. And I don't want them to die with me. I don't want to take these things to the grave. I feel like when these men spent this time molding me, shaping me, investing in me, it wasn't just for me, but it was for the generations that I might be able to impact. And as I said, God's blessed me. I've been able to work with a lot of young men. I've had a lot of young men that I've been able to invest in, but I still feel like there is so much there that has been given to me that I haven't had the opportunity to really get out there. And so to get back to the original question, and what is the future of Face the Truth? That's the framework for what we're looking at for the foreseeable future. I want these podcasts to reflect the things that have been put in me, that have been invested into my life. I want to get as much of this out as I can. And I want to be able even to go back and talk about those men and the particular role that they played and the specific things that I was able to pick up from them. There are certain men that, one statement that they made to me stands out in my life and became a driving factor as to who I would strive to be. For example, let me just throw one out, and I don't want this to turn into a lecture today, But so you guys, please feel free to jump in at any point. But Elder Huss Scherer, the name may not be all that familiar to many people. But in my day, he was highly respected. He was a great man of God. His father, Elder Harvey Scherer, was one of the pioneers of the apostolic movement in the early 1900s. And you can read some of, in fact, he's got, I think, a few books, if you can ever get a hold of them and find them, where he talks about some of these brush arbors and the things that he did and the miracles that God used him to perform. And his son, Huss, Huss, Huss was his first name, Huss Scherer. That man was so super sensitive to the Holy Ghost. It was just, I don't toss around the word prophet, but I do believe if Elder Huss Scherer, if ever there was a prophet in this modern apostolic age, I believe Elder Huss Scherer was one. And the impact, and again, I didn't get to spend a lot of time with Elder Scherer. I did get to spend some. I got to preach for him. I preached at his church. He had a tremendous church. He built a tremendous church. He pastored in Texarkana, Texas for many years. And then he left that church. That's where Brother Jason Calhoun is now. But he left that church. He went to Dayton, Ohio, pastored in Dayton, built that church up into a congregation of several hundred. And it was a powerful apostolic church. Some of our listeners may be familiar with Brother Chad Craig. Brother Chad Craig was raised under Elder Huss Scherer. That was his home church. And that was his pastor. And that's actually how I met Elder Scherer. But I was saying all this to say that sometimes one statement that a man made set a direction in my life. And that's why I'm talking about Elder Scherer right now. We were at a conference, and I had some things going on. I was a young man, and I had some things, young pastor, and I was wanting input. I've always been this way, and I guess this is why I feel like I've got so much in me, because I've always respected and valued the voice of elders, and still do to this day. And so I never have felt like I've got all the answers. I've never stepped on the scene and said, okay, world, I've arrived. I've just, that's not me. And so when I'm dealing with things, I want input from men that have walked the path, that have experienced these things before me. And so I had seen Elder Scherer at this conference. It was a very large conference, thousands of people there. I saw him, and so I went up to speak to him, and we were deep in conversation, and this young evangelist just walked up into the middle of our conversation, interrupted what we were saying, shook Elder Scherer's hand, and spoke to him, and then realized that I was there. I was the unimportant guy. I was unknown. Nobody knew who I was, and young man probably in my 30s at this point, and totally unknown in Pentecost for the most part, and so he realized somebody else was there and turned around, shook my hand too, and just kind of acknowledged my presence, and then went on. Well, when he was out of earshot, Elder Scherer turned and looked at me. And I'll never forget the look on his face, and I'll never forget the words that came out of his mouth. He looked at me with this deep, piercing gaze, and he said, "What did you feel about that man?" Well, to be totally honest, I didn't feel anything, except this guy's rude. He's rude. I mean, that's the only thing I was feeling, and that wasn't a feeling, it was just an observation. And my mind was still on my problem, wasn't on him. And so I just kind of sputtered and didn't really have a response. And Elder Scherer gave me, again, this stern look. And he said, "Son, in this hour, you better have some discernment."
Aye.
Now that shook me. And it's something, obviously, to this day, 30 years later, I still remember, because that did something to mold me, to understand in this work, in this life, there is a realm beyond what we see, and we can never reach a place. God help me, I'm feeling the Holy Ghost here and feeling the preach come on me. And
preach, Pastor.
We can never reach the place where we forget that there is an unseen world and there is a spiritual battle going on. And so much of what we see is not really what's happening. There's something beyond our purview, something deeper than what our eyes can focus on. And I'm telling you, it changed my perspective. And I realized, God, I need discernment. I need to be able to know what's driving a man. And at some point, maybe, but not today, but at some point, who knows, we may talk about the gifts of the Spirit. But it's not really the gift of discernment. If you look at it in the Scripture, and I've heard people say that, well, he's got the gift of discernment. And even then, they usually were not really talking about discernment. I heard one man use it one time because somebody had said something about an individual, said, I can tell there's a call of God on your life, and he didn't know the man, didn't know. And so somebody said, man, that guy, that was the gift of discernment. Well, number one, there is no gift of discernment. And number two, that was not what was going on. What Paul referred to was the discerning of spirits. That's different than just recognizing something about someone. Recognizing what spirit is motivating them is what Paul was talking about. And really there are only 3 categories of spirits, right? You've got, first of all, the human spirit. And sometimes it's the human spirit that's driving people. But then there is the Spirit of God. And we hope that that's the motivating factor in our lives. But third, there are demonic spirits. And they sometimes are what drives a man to do things. And we need to be able to discern. Is this God? Is this just that person? Is this the devil? We need to know. My mind goes back to the woman who's following Paul and saying, hear these men. These men are men of the Most High God. Hear ye them. They're showing you the way of salvation. Hear ye them. There's nothing wrong with what the woman said. But Paul discerned her spirit and turned around and rebuked the spirit that was in her. Unfortunately, a lot of preachers today would have been thrilled to have the following, right? They would have been thrilled to have somebody going and proclaiming how accurate these guys are. But Paul discerned the spirit behind it and rebuked the spirit. And I'm telling you, especially as a pastor, oh, Jesus, help us. We need the discerning of spirits. We need to be able to tell, even in a service, and I could really get off track here, but there's times that things happen in a service that some people say, oh, boy, God really, and it wasn't God at all. Sometimes it's just flesh. And sometimes it's demonic. I was in a very powerful service one time, and this was years ago. I mean, it was powerful. There's no question. Things were happening, and I mean, the power of God was moving. And I opened my eyes at one point and looked, and one of the men attending that church, it's the only time I've ever seen this in my life, but one of the men attending that church was under the pew with his arms to his side, slithering under the pews like a snake. Now, I was very young in the Lord at the time, and I thought that's strange. But looking back now, I realize that's not just strange. You know, had I had the discerning of spirits at that point, had I been able to pick up and at that moment what was going on, I feel very confident that I would have known this is demonic. God doesn't move on a man to worship in a way that resembles a serpent. I think it's necessary that we allow God to use us in the discerning of spirits. And that one little statement from Elder Sharon, I could talk a lot about Elder Sharon and a lot of the ways that he impacted me, but that one statement alone was enough to put him at a place of high honor in my life, because it really did guide what I was seeking after as a minister, what I wanted to accomplish within my ministry. So this is kind of what we're hoping to accomplish with Face the Truth going forward, is to be able to pull from some of these experiences and some of these men that have invested in me, and the things that I've gleaned from them, so that we've got, number one, that I've got the ability to share it with others on a broader platform than just saying it behind the pulpit of my local assembly. But also, so we will have a permanent record of these things. And when I pass off the scene, when my voice is silenced, whether through death or through mental decline or whatever, there will be a record for future generations to go back and hear them. You know, one of the things that I think has impacted so much of especially conservative apostolic people has been the lessons that Elder Verbal Bean taught on prayer. And had there not been a recording of those lessons, he would have impacted a few men. He would have, and he did. There are some men out there right now, Elder Jimmy Lee, that assisted Elder Bean. You know, there are men out there that were raised under his ministry, but there's not that many that are still out there. And those men, as great a men as they are, haven't had, and I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying that they haven't had an impact. They've had an impact, but it hasn't been as far-reaching. Does that make sense? It hasn't been as far-reaching as those recordings of Elder Bean. And then Brother Steve Carrier came along and transcribed it into book form. And so some people that have never heard the recordings, I heard the recordings. When I heard the recordings, it had such an impact on my life. A phenomenal impact. Changed my perspective on so many things. Being able to hear it. I never met him. He died in the mid-'70s. I got in the church in 1972. He was not in the United Pentecostal Church when he was killed in a tragic car wreck. I was. And so I never had the opportunity to hear. I was alive when he was alive for a few years. I was in church for a few years while he was still alive, but I never had the opportunity to hear him actually in person. But because there's a recording, I've been able to listen to him teach this himself. And what an impact it had on me. And now Brother Carrier, as I said, has transcribed it, put it in book form. I think somebody else has transcribed it again and tried to clear up some of it because Elder Carrier literally just transcribed it. He didn't edit it. He didn't clear up any language. He used all the euphemisms and everything. I mean, he just put it down word for word as Elder Bean spoke it. But somebody else, I think, has come along now and transcribed it again, but edited it and cleared up the language and had a few others, I think, put in the book. Some of those folks that I mentioned that spent time with Elder Bean, that knew him personally, to be able to shed some light. And I haven't yet gotten a copy of that version of the transcription. But my point is this. Thank God there were recordings. Thank God there is some record of the things that man said. I look at Elder D.C. Moody, who is another one of those who had a tremendous impact on me. And maybe one of these podcasts will talk about that. Maybe we can even get a hold of Elder Moody and get him to talk to us a little bit. I don't know. I don't know if he'd be willing to do that on a podcast or not. But he's had a tremendous impact on my life. Huge impact. But do you know, when you hear Elder Moody, one of the things he'll tell you is the biggest change in his ministry came when he heard the recordings of Elder Bean.
Wow.
He never heard Elder Bean personally. He never sat in any of his services. But somebody gave him the recordings. And here's a man, Elder Moody is a man mightily used in the gifts of the Spirit. Prophecy, tongues and interpretation, miracles, discerning of spirits, word of wisdom, word of knowledge. I can't tell you how many of these gifts I've seen operate in Elder Moody's life. And he will tell you that the reason those gifts operate, the reason he pursued God to that level, is because he got a hold of Elder Bean's recordings and listened to them over and over again.
Wow.
So I can't stress enough how important it is to get these things recorded. Not just to sit, we do a monthly ministers class. And if there's any of those, any pastors that are listening to this podcast, if you've got young ministers, you want to be in that class, if you'd like to join yourself and hear it for a few weeks, a few months, whatever, because we do it just once a month, contact us. Let me know. We're not going to take any young preachers into that class without their pastor's permission. It's just not going to happen. But if you would like to include them in that class, I am trying once a month. But I want to be able, I've got things, I'm kind of stammering now, but I've got, this is one of the things that I would have cleared up if this wasn't a live podcast. But there are just things that I want to convey beyond my local pulpit, beyond my monthly ministers class, beyond the few churches that allow me the privilege of standing in their pulpits. I want to be able to get this knowledge, get these experiences out there for as many people as possible. I want to impact the generations that are coming. I don't want to go to the grave. I preached a message in Tulsa at their college graduation for the Apostolic College Biblical Studies. And if any of you are not familiar with that, you really ought to look them up online, ACBS. I highly recommend. Of course, I'm prejudiced because I'm one of the teachers, so I'm one of the instructors.
And a good one, too.
Well, I don't know about all that, but I am one of the instructors. But high quality, apostolic learning. Don't even have to leave your home church. It's all online. Bishop Gary Howard set it up, and again, another man that had tremendous impact. But I preached a message at their graduation last year, and I talked about the mantle. And I talked about how you look at this with Elijah leaving his mantle behind and Elisha picking that up. And then you look at Elisha, and the man that should have picked up his mantle was Gehazi. Because Gehazi filled the same role in Elisha's life that Elisha had filled in Elijah's life. Gehazi was the heir to that mantle. But instead, he died a leper. Didn't get the mantle. But then I brought out something else, and there's a lot of controversy on this. And you know what? Those that are listening, if your pastor disagrees, you find out what he says. Don't demand that what I'm saying is the right way to look at it. And I'm really not going to deal with one way or the other, because there's a lot of controversy on it. But you think about when King Saul reached that point, the final days of his life. He's about to go to battle. He's worried about the outcome. The prophet Samuel is now dead. Saul's trying to get some kind of direction from God, and he can't get it. And what does he do? That's not a rhetorical question. I'm hoping you guys at least will let your voices be heard. So what does King Saul do to try to get some direction about the battle? Do you guys remember? He did something very ungodly to try to get an answer. Nobody remembers.
Didn't he go and offer sacrifice himself?
Well, no, that was long before that. At this point, he's trying to get some answers. The prophet's dead. He wants a word from God.
To the witch.
He went to a witch. There you go.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Went to the witch, man.
He went to the witch. And so the witch brings up somebody. Now, this is where the debate is. Was it Samuel? Was it not Samuel? Did she really call somebody back from the dead? If she did, I'll say it this way. If she did, then I think God somehow overrode the witchcraft that was being presented and allowed this to happen. All right, as I don't think the devil has the ability to bring people, bring their spirits back from the grave. But if this is really Samuel, if it is really Samuel, it's an interesting thing. Do either of you remember how she described what she saw?
I don't.
Yeah, I wish I had that verse. I didn't realize I was going there, because it's interesting what she said she saw when he specifically asked her. He specifically asked her to bring up Samuel. I mean Saul. Samuel, yes. Saul was the one. And he specifically asked the witch, bring up Samuel. Here's what she says. This is 1 Samuel 28, verse 14. Well, let me back up. So 1 Samuel 28, verse 12. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice. And the woman spake to Saul, saying, Why hast thou deceived me? For thou art Saul. And the king said unto her, Be not afraid, for what sawest thou? And the woman said unto Saul, I saw gods ascending out of the earth. Now, you got to understand this word gods doesn't... The Hebrew word here can be used for people of great prominence. All right? It doesn't necessarily mean false gods or demonic spirits. But, for instance, in the book of Psalms, where Jesus made reference to it. Do you remember Jesus making reference to, said, does not the Bible say ye are gods? Right. So the book of Psalms uses that terminology, ye are gods. Not God apostrophe S, but little g, G-O-D-S. Well, when it uses that term, it doesn't mean your deity. It's a Hebrew idiom that actually refers to a people or a person of great prominence. Kind of like the word Lord, right? We only today use the word Lord with regard to Jesus Christ. But you know, like Abraham was called Lord by Sarah. She wasn't saying that Abraham was her God. But the word Lord was a term given to show utmost respect, admiration. This was a position of authority. And so that's what the witch, when she says, I saw gods ascending out of there, she's not claiming that she saw Lucifer and she saw Baal, and she's saying, I saw people of great prominence coming up. And so we get down to this verse 14. So she said, because again, I saw gods. But then he said unto her, what form is he of? Right? So this is another illustration. The word Elohim, which is what we're dealing with here. Trinitarians like to say Elohim in Genesis 1 means that there's more than one person. It doesn't. It is a majestic plural, and this is as good an example as any. She said, I saw Elohim. And she wasn't referring to the Creator, but she uses a plural word. So what she saw was someone of great significance, someone who truly deserved to be honored. And Saul says to her, what form is he of? Singular. This Elohim that you saw, describe him to me. So here's what she said. She said, an old man cometh up, and he is covered with a mantle. Now that struck me. And what I preached in Tulsa is, if this really is Samuel, we know that Israel told him, your sons don't walk after your ways. There was no one to take Samuel's place. He took his mantle to the grave with him.
Oh, my.
Brethren, sisterin, whoever's listening, I don't want to be guilty of taking my mantle to the grave. Not that I think I've got some great mantle. Not that I put myself... You understand what I'm saying? I'm not saying I'm Elijah or I'm Elisha or I'm Samuel. But I think with every minister that really gives themselves to God, there is some degree of a mantle associated with their ministry. And I don't want to take that mantle to the grave with me.
Right.
So you wanted to say something, Brother Hilton?
I was just thinking about, you were talking about discernment a little bit earlier, and it was a comment from Elder Huss Scherer that really sparked your interest in pursuing that information. And we, in today's day and age, we've got so many other sources of information, social media, news sources, and all of that. And we're trying to combat that a little bit with this podcast and get more information out there specifically along these lines, information that would spark an interest in those. And Brother Goff and I and those others that you've already mentioned, we've been able to have direct access to you and to take part and try to gain. I don't want just your mantle. I want, as Elisha told Elijah, I want a double portion of your mantle. And that, I'm not saying that but what I want is the furthering of God's kingdom, for God's kingdom to continue to expand, for His kingdom to continue to have its to exercise in full power. And so I'm just curious if I mentioned the discernment thing. What areas in our generation, in my generation, do you feel like we are, if you were Elder Huss Scherer looking at a young man, 30 years old, I'm 30 years old, 31, what would you say to them when they are seemingly going, perhaps ignorantly is the wrong word, but or just sublime, everything's fine, everything's cool, everything's good. What are you concerned about?
I think, honestly, my answer would be the very same answer Elder Scherer gave me. Because with all of these voices out there, I think there is a greater need for discernment today than there has ever been. And it's not just these voices, but look, because of social media, because of YouTube, there are so many places that people are going, hearing these voices, seeing these churches do certain things. Look, we're watching a fad right now, and I don't mind saying it because this is our podcast, so expect to hear my opinions. but we are watching this fad sweep through the supposedly conservative movement of blacking out all the walls and getting as many LED lights on the platform as possible and turning the whole platform into a stage. And I don't just mean a stage in the generic sense. I mean a theatrical stage. And it's becoming extremely popular. Turn all the lights off in the sanctuary. Just get focused on the platform. And it gives everything a nightclub feel. Well, I'm telling you, it's one thing for me to just get up and say, we don't need to do that. And I do. And you've heard me. But the problem is, we need this generation to develop discernment. Where does that come from? Where is that taking us? What's the real driving spirit behind this fad? Is this the church does adapt. The church has adapted to certain things. We're using microphones. We're using cameras. Things that our forefathers didn't even have as an option. Yes, we've adapted. Yes, we've picked things up. But the thing is, we've got to be able to discern which things do we pick up and which things do we leave alone. We've got to be able to know what's driving this. Is this really about winning the lost? I'm going to make a real statement here, and I know that we're on all these platforms, and I know there's a lot of people listening that are not even in what we would call our circles. But, you know, one of the big battles that I fought and faced was this idea that we need to advertise on television. And the claim was always, we got to reach the lost. We got to get into these communities we can't get into. We got to reach the lost. And only television can accomplish this. And it sounds very logical and very appealing. But I'm telling you that the spirit within me said there's something deeper here. This is not about outreach. This is not about winning the lost. This is about stardom. This is about making a star out of men so they can be there front and center, that they become the voice that everyone's listening to. And the thing about it is, I was able to see the early days of this because this battle started back in the 70s. I hadn't been in the church very long at all when the battle first started. And a very well-known, very highly regarded, highly respected man, considered a conservative at the time, was at the forefront of we've got to get on television to reach the lost. He was one of the leaders. And the battle raged, and they fought, and they ended up, at that time, pushing it down. And so this guy went off on his own and went on television. It didn't take long before he began to realize, you know, our style of worship really doesn't fit very well on television. Mm-hmm. And so they begin to tell their people off screen, look, we want you to dance, we want you to shout, but not in front of the cameras. So if you feel like you got to do that, then I want you to go off into one of these other rooms and do that there. But let's not do it here in the sanctuary.
Wow.
And it started affecting everything because they were camera conscious. And everything then became a production. All right? So in the early days, they fought that battle. Thank God the right side won then, but it didn't take too many years before it came right back again. And the second time that it came up, the other side won. Well, many of us pulled away at that time. COVID comes along, and then all of a sudden, all of these men who were preaching against this suddenly decided, having a camera in our sanctuary and broadcasting our services is the right thing to do. And think about all the sinners we're going to reach. Same argument.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right? Same argument. But I'm telling you, brethren, our worship is still not acceptable in front of a camera. Number one. Number two, it's a very private thing. Our worship shouldn't be broadcast to the whole world. It ought to be between us and God.
Right.
So, and again, I know a lot of folks disagree with me on this. I understand that. Just telling you, this is where we don't need to just listen to who's popular, listen to who's got the big churches. That man that I referred to, that was one of the first to go on television, had one of the largest churches in the state of Texas at the time. And that's saying something, because there were some big churches in Texas. But he had one of the largest. Today, that church doesn't even exist. So don't tell me how successful this stuff is in the short term. This is where we don't want to look at, okay, he's got a big church, therefore we need to listen. And one man that preached against it has even gotten up and publicly said, and I know I'm going to be criticized, I know this will go out, but he publicly said, if you're not live streaming, video streaming your service on Sunday night, you're missing the will of God. Well, brethren, I guess I'm just going to miss the will of God, because we're just not going to do it. To me, a church service is a private time for that body, for that congregation. We do stream the audio, but when the audio is going on, you don't see somebody flipping their hair around like a bullwhip and people rolling on the ground and, the snotty crying that's going on. You don't see all of that when you're just hearing the audio, and there's a big difference there. And so my answer, Brother Hilton, it's a long answer, but my answer is I still think the most important thing for this generation is to develop, through prayer, a discerning of spirits, and to be able to choose the voices that they hear. The Apostle Paul said there are many voices, and none of them are without signification. Everyone has got its purpose. But he goes on to tell them, it's like this. You've got a lot of teachers, but you've only got one Father. And so basically what he was trying to get through to them was, there's a lot of people out there vying for your attention, but don't ever forget who your pastor is. Mm-hmm. And don't ever let those voices override the voice of the man of God in your life. And I'm telling you, it's as you listen to the man of God in your life, that's where we come back to this whole idea of a mantle, because you need to let him pass that mantle on to you. And even if you have no idea, no concept of ever preaching, there's a part of his ministry that needs to live on in your life. There are things that need to blossom in your life. But you know how you learn to discern things? Yes, there is a gift of the discerning of spirits, and that's necessary and needed. But there is also a process where you learn to discern, because one of the things that God said to Ezekiel is, I want you to teach my people to discern between the profane and the holy. Mm-hmm. I want you to teach them how to discern. So discernment is bigger than just the gift of the discerning of spirits. Discernment also involves learning some things that helps you make the right decisions at the right time and figuring out what's right, what's wrong, what direction do we go from here. And the way you're going to learn that is from, again, this was the job given to Ezekiel. So you're going to get that from the man of God in your life.
Yes.
And a lot of things, I wouldn't point to the gift of the discerning of spirits, but I would say that when Elder Scherer said that to me, it was more than just that gift. But learning how, what have these elders taught me? What's the direction they set forward? I want to go back and ask for the old path, which is the good way. And you find rest for your souls. I don't want to just throw them away as dinosaurs. They just didn't understand. They just don't have a clue about today's generation. I don't want to do that. These were godly men. They were praying men. And many of the decisions at which they arrived came through a time of prayer and seeking God and studying the scriptures, and sometimes just good old-fashioned common sense that's really lacking in a lot of today's society.
Right.
So, yeah, that's, I think my answer today would still be, son, in this hour, you need discernment.
So, Bishop, if I could ask this, in that setting, you went asking for direction for something, and then you walked away with a lesson that is far greater than what you went for. And I think that's important. But I think what also is important is, if you have not learned that lesson, chances are the people you pastor would never pick up on that discernment as well. And it would have silenced the voice of God, like you mentioned in that example of a large church that's now no longer. That man silenced that, you said, the spirit behind the motive, behind the, wherever they were reaching for, pretty much may have silenced that voice of God, being able to say, listen, it's not just you, pastor, but now it trickles down to your saints.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question. I think that, and that's a great point, that I don't even remember what question I was asking Elder Scherer. And I don't remember what advice he gave me. All of that became irrelevant. But the one statement spoken off the cuff, if you please, and probably not really off the cuff, because knowing the man, knowing his relationship with God, understanding what I understand now, there's times that, Brother Merriman, who's pastoring in Mississippi, that I've had the privilege of pastoring, he told a story one day, I think on this podcast, of me stepping off of the platform, and several of the preachers were right there, and me just making this statement to them that don't ever reach a place where you have a desire to preach meetings. And when he said that, I didn't even remember ever saying that. I didn't remember having that conversation. But obviously that was one of those moments that, for whatever reason, the inspiration was there, the feeling was there. I said it, and I never thought about it again. And Brother Scherer may have never thought about again making that statement to me. I don't know. But it was needed at that time, and it guided my life from that day to this. And so, yeah, it's and his voice lives on today. Not just through Elder Craig and whatever other men that he impacted, but his voice lives on today through me in something he passed on that I'm now able to pass on. And so there's a part of that mantle that I'm handing out through Face the Truth right now. And I can't tell you I'm wearing Elder Scherer's mantle, but I can tell you there's a part of his ministry that I'm handing off right now because of one encounter. It was much more than that. As I said, he had a profound impact. I could tell you stories about Elder Scherer and the things that the other ways that he impacted me. But that one thing alone had it became a driving force in my life. And I know how these kinds of conversations can do exactly that. And that's why I really am looking forward to the future of Face the Truth here, because who knows but what one comment at a moment like this can impact the life of a listener and really change their trajectory. Because they're no longer just looking at who's popular, and so I'm going to listen to them because they're popular. But they learn to discern. Not everything that's popular is the will of God.
Amen.
That's a pretty important lesson that a lot of folks need to learn. Because there's a lot of stuff popular. There's a lot of stuff out there right now going around. And again, in conservative circles. Prosperity gospel, dominion theology. There's a whole lot of things that are out there right now in conservative circles that young men, I'm going to pass off the scene. It's not going to affect me. It's not, my course is set. They're not going to sway me. They're not going to impact me in any way. I'm not going to change what I've preached. I am a dinosaur, okay? And I guess at this point, I'm probably a T-Rex because my reach is very short. You just have to kind of get a mental picture of what a T-Rex looks like to understand what I'm saying there. My reach is pretty short. I am a dinosaur. And you know, outside of God speaking to me, what other men do, what other men say, it's not going to affect where my ministry goes from here. But you younger men, your life is still being molded. It's still being shaped. That was spoken to me when, again, I was probably in my 30s. But remember that I started pastoring at 24. So I'd been pastoring maybe 10 years at that point already. But it still had an impact from that day forward. And looking back, probably had I had that word spoken to me 10 years earlier, maybe there were some mistakes that I made that I wouldn't have made. People that I trusted that I wouldn't have trusted. Or people I may have trusted that I didn't because the discernment wasn't there. And not to say God never allowed me to have discernment. I'm not saying that at all. But it just became a greater factor in my life after that moment because I became more cognizant. I became more aware of the importance of that.
And I think what's important is they're not just stories, they're principles that have been proven, they're backed in Scripture. And as someone who's come out from under your ministry, Bishop, I know that now I can pick up the phone, we can reach out, communicate, we can work through things. But what's important is I don't go back and say, well, my pastor told me a story. And I get there's those times where that's applicable. But when there's those things where my pastor put things in me and it was proven out. And I think that's the beauty of doing this series and this podcast is you're able to say, this is what they taught me, and this is how I used it and proved it, and it changed me. And so now it's not, well, man, I wish we could talk to Elder Scherer. I wish we could talk to, oh, man, what if Elder Beam was still here? No, it lives on in the generations. That's the beauty of it, and it's impactful. It's not let's go back to talk to that person, like, you know, conjuring up Samuel again, the man of God, to come speak. It's putting it in our hearts, letting it live, and honoring it in that way, and not say, well, yeah, that's a beautiful story, but that's just not applicable in this day and age. We don't do that anymore. And I think that's something that is important for us. Like you said, I remember when you taught us a long time ago that discernment was in our ministerial toolbox. If we don't have that, we are a disservice to that congregation, and things will happen. And there's sometimes you see something, but then you just step back and let it unfold, and you're able to understand those things. And I think it's important for this time to be able to hear what you're able to share with us, those influences, and then giving that credit back to those resources to honor them, but also showing us that you can apply and use this going forward, and it's not lost.
Yes, absolutely. And hopefully it will be a great benefit. Hopefully this whole, until we feel a direction to do something different, hopefully this will be of great benefit to everybody that chooses to listen. And that will be, as you said, things that are applicable, things that they themselves can take on and say, okay, here's how this will help me going forward. And again, it's not even just something that preachers need. This is something saints need as well. They need discernment. And that's when we get back to Ezekiel and the command that was given to Ezekiel. Understand, God didn't tell Ezekiel to teach the other prophets how to discern. The command was for Ezekiel to teach the people how to discern. The people need discernment, not just the preachers. And this is extremely important to a saint because, again, there's a lot of voices out there. You got to be able to determine when this voice is one worth listening to and when it's not. And so you need discernment in your life, not just among the ministry. Now, any other comments on that? As we talk about the future, there's a few other things I want to talk about that we hope to incorporate, but either of you men.
I was thinking about the same exact thing, just jumping into sharing what, some of the I think it was a natural segue into the things that we had talked about before this session to open up to the Face the Truth followers.
And I think that's kind of what brought it to my mind as well. By the way, I do want to say to everybody that's trying to, we do have a live stream going right now that our church folks are able to join in. For those who do not see Brother Hilton, and yes, we are doing some video here, but it's very private. It's not open to the public. And to me, there's a big difference between a video podcast and videoing a service. I see a huge difference because, as I said, worship is very private. And, the things that happen in a local assembly, when the Apostle Paul spoke of a body, you can search this out for yourself, but when you read through his epistles, anytime he spoke of a body, he was not speaking of the body of Christ worldwide. Go look at it yourself. He's not dealing with the body of Christ worldwide. He's looking at each individual church as a body. And so there are things very private for each individual church that just don't need to be shared with the whole world. And so we will never, as long as I'm pastor, live stream or video live stream our church services. This is where my line's drawn. Some men draw it at the podcast as well, and that's why we don't make the video stream available to everybody. But I just wanted to clarify for those that are on this video live stream, we do call this Face the Truth Live, even though most people will hear it via recording afterwards. But for those who are not seeing Brother Hilton, but you're hearing him, we had some problems at the last minute with one of our cameras. And so all of that we hope to fix. It also looks like a lot of times I'm looking down at the ground, and that's because, again, something we need to adjust here. But the screen I'm having to see so I can see Brother Goff's face, I can either turn around and look at him behind me, and then the back of my head is to the camera, or I can look down at the ground, and then everybody's seeing the top of my head. So that's the two choices I have right now. But it's just weird to talk to a bookcase beyond the screen, so I'm trying to focus on Brother go off, and I'm having to look down to do that. But anyhow, just wanted to explain why you hear Brother Goff and see him, you hear me and see me, you don't see Brother Hilton. We will hopefully have that fixed before our next podcast, where you can see him as well. But as far as the future of what we have planned and what we want to do, and we'd love to get some feedback on this, and I will tell you that the best way to do that is info. Is that
Info at Olathe
info at olathetruth.com, OLATHETRUTH, olathetruth.com, info at olathetruth.com. If you'll email that, we'd be happy to get some feedback. But we are looking at some ways that we can incorporate our listening audience, of setting a regular schedule of when we do this live podcast each month, set it at a particular time on a particular day, and follow through with that every month. And so that our listeners can join in that podcast. And then we can allow you to get into the chat feature, type in questions. There may even be times that we bring somebody in and get them involved, one of our listeners. Now, we're going to be very discretionary about this. We're going to be very careful about this because, again, I realize there are pastors who are trusting me. They've shared this podcast with their saints. I don't ever want to cross a line of ethics in any way. So we're not just going to open the floor to anybody and everybody's saints. That's not going to happen. It's not who we are at Face the Truth. I'm going to always be extremely ethical, maybe sometimes going overboard, but I would rather be too ethical than not ethical enough. It's just the way I am. It's who I am. So we hope to be able to develop a way that if you just want to follow, you just want to listen, then, we'll, as a regular, number one, if you're subscribed, if you go into the Google Podcasts or the Apple Podcasts or Spotify and subscribe to us, you'll get a notification. I think when we go live, is that right?
No, sir,
just when we put a new episode.
Correct.
Okay. I know on YouTube there is a way that you can subscribe and get a notification when somebody's going live. But it's a private link that we set up when we stream this live. But anyhow, we're working on trying to develop a way that if you're a member of somebody else's church, we get your pastor's approval for you to participate. And then we can allow you to ask questions in the chat. We can discuss things with you. And I think this is going to add a dimension to Face the Truth that to my knowledge does not exist. There are a lot of even apostolic podcasts out there and even a number of conservative podcasts out there, conservative apostolic. But I don't know of any of them that include the listeners. They bring a guest in or they do other things, but I don't know of any that actually just allow people in real time to ask questions as the podcast is progressing. But I think that can add a dimension to this that can be extremely beneficial. It will be available to our church family, but to those outside of the Truth Church in Olathe, it's going to be at the pastor's discretion, and we'll find a way to vet the listeners. We're going to figure all that out. But it's something we're looking at for the future so that we can get your input, hear from you, maybe take your questions. Maybe today, some of the things that I've talked about, some of you have had questions, and maybe even some of you pastors that are listening are thinking, man, I'd like to say this, or I'd like to ask this about this discernment. I'd like to know. And so we want to try to create a way that you can do that. We want to create a way so that the podcast has got greater depth. I was telling these brethren before we went live, there's a podcast that I listen to. It is a political podcast, but it's unlike any other that I know of that's out there. They have somebody from either side. They've got two men that are on every day. One's a Republican, one's a Democrat. And they have a man that moderates and really does a very fair job of moderating. And they'll start out the day talking about whatever's the latest hot topic. And he moderates and allows these two men to kind of debate the issues back and forth a little bit. And then he opens it up. They have a Zoom. And they've got just hundreds of people that get on Zoom with them. And they'll actually bring somebody from the audience in. And what's so great about this is that these other two guys, their whole life revolves around politics. And so they think along a certain line. But you bring the general populace in, they're going to think of things that the politicians don't think of. You know, the average man is going to see some perspective that the politician hadn't even considered. And so when they bring the audience in like this, it adds something to the discussion that nobody else even thought about. And so it's become one of my favorites, and as much as I can, I try to listen to them live every day. And so I would like to see Face the Truth kind of doing something, not so much as in giving both sides, or we have to bring in some liberal to talk about what we're discussing, or some Trinitarian, you know, we're not. But I'm just talking about getting the perspective of somebody outside of our little, you know, as preachers. The three of us are all ministers of the gospel. But to hear the input of a saint and get their perspective on these things as well, I think can really add a dimension to this. Now, we may try it and decide, you know what, we don't ever want to do that again. But it is something we're thinking about and considering and looking into. How can we accomplish this and yet maintain the lines of ethics that is a part of who we are and what we stand for? So all of that's a part of what we're looking at for the future of Face the Truth, and I do hope that we can incorporate it, and we'd love to get some feedback if you're interested in letting us know, does this sound like something you think would be beneficial to you? And of course, at any time, if there are questions, if there are things that you would like to know or like for us, topics you'd like for us to discuss, feel free to send those, info@olathetruth.com. We thought about setting up a separate email address, but I think we'll just stick with that for right now. We may at some time maybe set up something else where it just strictly does that. Maybe we can look at a Gmail address or something, facethetruth@gmail. I don't know. I don't know. I'm talking off the cuff here, so who knows what we come up with. But some way for you to stay in touch with us and give us your feedback on the podcast and let us know. The greatest thing you can do, honestly, is to subscribe. That's one of the best things, because that just helps get the word out about us. And comment. Subscribe and comment. Those things help us with our algorithms and lets us reach a greater audience. And again, I'm not interested in getting into some man's church and trying to pull somebody's saints. I'm not interested in any of that. I've been accused of that. That is not, God knows my heart, that is not at all. I want to help men. I've been out there. I took a church. I didn't start the church, but I took a church that had 8 voting members, only 6 of whom came to church. There were 2 people that were legally, according to the church constitution at that time, allowed to vote. If something came up, they were going to vote for pastor. When I got there as pastor, they voted. But they never came to church. So we had 6 people really coming to church at the time. So that's as close to home missions as I ever care to get. But I know what those days were like, and I know how I wanted them to be able to hear the voice of men that I trusted, men that I respected. But I couldn't always afford to bring those men in. And I wish there had been something like this. And we lived 50 miles from the closest apostolic church, 40 to 50 miles to the closest apostolic church. I mean, of any kind. There was nothing in the state where I was at the time. If I wanted them to go to a rally, they're going to drive 40 to 50 miles to get to that rally. And many of our people couldn't afford that. They couldn't do it. And so getting them to be able to hear somebody else was a major thing. And I understand that. I remember those days. And so if I can provide something to a pastor of a home missions church or a small struggling congregation where there's another voice they can listen to that's going to confirm the voice of the pastor in their life, it's not going to be trying to pull them out of that. You lose one family out of a home missions church and it's devastating. It's major. And I remember those days. And I am not in any way trying to pull anybody out of anyone's congregation. I've got a city here of, 2.5 million people in the Kansas City metro that I need to reach. And I'm not trying to reach saints in somebody else's church. I want to reach the lost. And so we want to be ethical about it. We want to be cautious about it, conscientious about it. But as long as the pastor is okay with it, we want to bring folks in, and we want to be able to help strengthen, hold up the hands, I should say, of the pastor in that local assembly. So that's kind of what we've got planned. Did I miss anything?
I think that was everything, Brother Goff.
I think that was it. I was looking over some notes, and I believe you're correct.
Well, I think I've done enough preaching today. I don't know how long we've gone. I don't know how long this is.
About an hour and a half.
Okay, I can't see it over there. That screen again. We got to get that fixed. We got to get that fixed where I can see it. I can't see it. So, hour and a half's a lot longer than what we normally go. I didn't realize I'd been quite that long-winded.
That's okay. We don't have as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. And if there's no other closing comments, I don't know that right now we've got a date for the next one. But again, if you'll send us an email to info@OlatheTruth, we'll try to create a list. We'll try to create an email list.
Absolutely.
That we can send you out a notification. Here's when the next one's going live, so you can join in and be a part of that. Otherwise, if you're subscribed, you'll get a notice when it is uploaded and ready for you to hear the content. So thank you all for your attention. Thank you, Brother Goff, Brother Hilton, for putting up with me tonight. You know, an old man, we just kind of ramble. We just, sometimes this is just the way life gets for us. But again, I've got so much. I've got over 50 years of things that have been put into me that I'm getting this opportunity to now share and let it flow.
I feel like this specific episode is the first time we've really gotten to that level of authenticity that I have been trying to, and I'm not disparaging any of the previous episodes. Just the level of discourse that you've got.
Maybe transparency.
The transparency, absolutely.
I hope I've been authentic in every episode. But
right, transparency.
But maybe I haven't been as transparent as in this one. But that's something I look forward to doing. And you men know me, and you know I live a transparent life. I just do.
Right.
Yes, sir.
I always have. Well, I've tried to. And there's just nothing hidden about me. What you see is what you get. But I want to be able to share that in these episodes. I want people to be able to feel that about me. I'm not some man sitting up on a pedestal somewhere that, you got to grovel. You got to come kiss the ring. It's first of all, I don't have one.
Yeah, we don't believe in those.
I don't have one. But that's not the kind of guy I am, and I try to be very approachable and very just down to earth. It's who I am, and we had a new family one time that had to come by the house for something. And I said, hey, you haven't seen our house. Let me show you. God blessed us. We hadn't lived in the house very long. And I took them on tour. And later she commented something. She said, I couldn't believe that he was like that. She'd only seen me in the pulpit. And she said, he took me through his house. He showed me, open closet doors, and she just couldn't get over the fact. I said, no, that's who I am. There's nothing hidden with me. I am who I am, and I'm just real. I'm not putting on any facade for anybody. It's just who I am. So yeah, I do try to be authentic in everything, but maybe I haven't been quite as transparent because we've been just dealing with other things and not dealing with me.
Right.
But seeing this opportunity now to just unburden my heart going forward. It's not going to be so much about here's the topic of the day,
right,
as it is here's what's on my heart. And here's why. Here's who put that in me.
Right.
Here are the things that I gleaned while I was under his ministry, or while I was around him, or the times that he came to preach for me. And, being able to share those things, extremely valuable to me, and I think will be valuable to everyone going forward. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Riggin, and thank you to everyone who has joined us for today's Face the Truth Live event. We want you to know that we are here to help you in any way that we can. If there's anything we can do for you, please don't hesitate to contact us. Send your prayer requests to prayer@olathetruth.com. That's prayer@olathetruth.com. If you live in the Kansas City metropolitan area and do not have a home church, we invite you to join us for our service this week, Sunday morning at 10 a.m., Sunday evening at 6 p.m., Tuesday evening at 7:30 p.m. For those who cannot attend, we will provide a live stream on our Facebook page, our YouTube page, and our website, olathetruth.com/live. Until our next Face the Truth Live event, take care and God bless.